We have arrived to the end of this first Maxsurf course, so we are going now to summarize the main topics that we have learned. Okay, in this unit, we talk a bit about the main aspects of this first Maxsurf course. And also we talk about the different models of Maxsurf and which are the main calculations that we can perform on each of them. Secondly, we learn how to work with the marker points table, creating the different stations for each surface that we wanted to create. Then we learn how to create those surfaces since those marker points here. We also learn how to configure the rows and the quantity of columns for the surface net. We learn how to work with the stiffness of the surfaces in order the curvature we want to achieve, and how we can modify the form of the rows and columns of the surface net by the control point distributions, the constraints, and also the convergence limits. In this first unit, we worked with a pilot boat with sharp bilge, also known as hard bilge, and with a straight sections, since this is the first step because we only need 2 marker points to define each section, each station of each of the surfaces that we want to create. If you see here in this first model, we worked with different surfaces, dividing the hull in bottom, chine, side, and deck. And then we started modeling some specific surfaces and details such as the transom, the cabin, these astern casings, and some specific appendages such as the rudder stock here, and also some non-buoyant compartments such as the bow thruster tunnel. We also learn how to generate deck steps such as this in the bow and this in the astern zone. We practice how to generate tunnels working with cylinders and trimming the bottom with them. We also learn how to generate an skeg. Remember that some of these appendages and details are not typical of this type of high-speed craft, but we modeled them in order to practice how to do it only for academic purposes. We also learn how to generate these curved joints between the transom and the side. And we also learn how to generate bulwarks, not only extruding vertically, but also using the cutting curves command. Cutting surfaces with cutting curves. We have practiced the use of many of the main commands of Maxsurf Modeler, such as aligning to vector, compacting points. We have also worked with important commands about surfaces such as move surface, delete surface, sizing surface, flipping surface, also join surface, and also extruding surfaces. There are some other commands such as skin curves and sweep surfaces that we are going to practice in the next levels. We also learn how to trim surfaces. What I mean is surfaces using surfaces and also surfaces using cutting curves. We learn how to generate some data points curves and also linears, points and arcs. We practice how to trim surfaces between surfaces and surfaces using cutting curves, but we also learn how to turn on and turn off the trimming option. We learn how to change the precision, and we learn how to practice with the different types of renderings and which is the functionality of each of them. Then we learn how to check the units and also how to change the dimensions for the calculation of hydrostatic coefficients. We learn how to design grid similar to the linesplans, creating sections, buttocks, waterlines, and diagonals. We learn how to visualize them not only in the rendering view but also in the different views of the model. And finally, we learn some other specific commands such as how to calculate the girth length of a station, how to obtain the curve of areas, how to obtain the curve of areas, and how to generate points to try to achieve that reference curve. Including those specific and particular commands, we learn how to calculate the area and also the coordinates of the center of gravity above the design waterline and also below the design waterline, and not only in the 3D view but also in the different 2D view. And we also practice how to adjust some of the dimensions of the model and some hydrostatics using the parametric transformation command for small adjustments. And we also learn how to create the aft and the forward perpendiculars and also how to change the 0 point, which is our reference point, and the design waterline that we input here to obtain a preliminary calculation of hydrostatic and a preliminary curve of area. Besides, remember that we learn how to use different commands to check the smoothness of the curves. For example, generating a grid to check the smoothness of the lines in the different views. Also using the area curves to check if we have unlogical discontinuities, unlogical crests and valleys in this curve, which means that we have a smoothness problem in the surfaces of the model. And we also use the different renders to check the smoothness of the lines in order to find discontinuities, crests and valleys, or local deformations in the different surfaces. Then we practice how to model a sailing boat, not with sharp bilge, a sailing boat with round bilge, and we learn that the process is very different from the model of the first unit, because here we could generate a preliminary hull surface using only one table of marker points and only one surface. The procedure is analogous, but we only need one surface. Then we made some adjustments in the rendering view and in the different views, generating the grid from the lines plan and using the control point mesh station by station and also completely moving the position of those control points, checking if the stations pass through the marker points created, and if that didn't happen, we started moving slightly the positions of the control points in order to achieve that. Then we generated the transom using the extruding command in the transverse direction in the sense of the center line, and we also created the deck adding a row in the transverse view to that station in order to give some transverse curvature to that surface. We have reached the end. I am very grateful and I really appreciate your participation in this course. I hope you have enjoyed and learned a lot. For me, it has been a very pleasant experience, and I'm looking forward to see you in the next levels of the course. Thank you very much, and good luck.